Dark Souls Remastered, while still technically a remaster of the original game, leans more towards an enhanced port. The experience of this is matched closely to the PC version of the game with the DS Fix mod installed. It's the very same experience I originally got when I first played the game, and still have access to. Actually, that is not entirely true. When I originally played through the entire game with very little cooperation, as it was, and still is, fairly difficult to find summons and to be summoned. Something was wrong with the network environment which inhibited multiplayer. What it seems the Dark Souls Remaster is going to offer above all else is a booming online multiplayer, now with dedicated servers and as a result, less lag. The online will likely be bigger than it ever was back in its heyday. If that's all you need to hear to drop $40 on almost the same game you had access to on the PC with mods, then go for it. But if Dark Souls on the go is what you crave, then pick it up on the Switch. From what I've played of the network stress test, I'm underwhelmed with the very few changes both in aesthetics and in the gameplay. Dark Souls deserves more care and polish than what it's getting in the upcoming May 25th release. Some may say it's a good thing that Dark Souls was perfect. It's better not to meddle with a masterpiece. While I agree with that mindset, there are some things I do disagree with. As we all know, Dark Souls is not perfect, but we do appreciate the charm of the game. We really couldn't imagine it any other way. There are many signs of rushed development, and some areas are very rough in design and poorly optimized. There are also some gameplay flaws, such as being attacked and killed through walls by enemies when your own weapon will collide with just about anything other than what you're trying to hit. And by today's standards, and it was also pretty borderline back then, Dark Souls is graphically very poor, and this remaster doesn't do anything to hide its age. You can still see all the little corners they cut in the environments, with poor geometry and textures. Now in 4K resolution and 60 frames per second, unless you're playing the Switch version, which will more closely resemble the PS3 version, only the frame rate probably won't tank when you get the Blight Town. I hope. We don't know, as a different team entirely is handling the Switch port. Don't get me wrong, there are some nice little graphical additions, but they were necessary. Most apparent of the changes is in the world and environmental lighting system. Lighting refracts off of surfaces in a more realistic way, making for shinier shields and armor. I also enjoy the way skin looks, especially when hollow. It makes me crave beef jerky. While you're out there praising the sun, you may notice some nice sun flares. The bump mapping was enhanced, giving shields, weapons, and armor a more detailed appeal. Particle effects are a noticeable enhancement, making the various effects look passable on modern hardware. Everything from fog walls, blood spatter, fire, and summoning looks far better. I also don't mind the air debris. Unfortunately, there are still shadow glitches where they appear to go through walls and floors. I thought a remaster would do something about that, but hey, like I said, it's passable. They didn't attempt to go above and beyond with it graphically, they just wanted to make it passable. As far as audio goes, I did notice the sound is a lot more crisp and clear. They still use the same sound engine, making reverb sound extremely unrealistic, but it has its own ethereal charm to it. It still has the problem with transitioning ambience between sound files, resulting in a quick cut from one sound to another as you traverse different areas. The audio is obviously remastered, but like the graphics, they are simply passable. As for the online multiplayer that I saw in the network stress test of Dark Souls Remastered, it appears to work wonderfully. It has very little to no lag, which is a giant step up from my previous experience doing PvP in a P2P setting. Assholes could lag switch your ass or simply use their terrible internet connections against you, making for some chaotic gameplay. From what I've seen in a setting like this, the only real lag I've encountered was when I switched from local to global in the network settings. It was then I started to experience lag, so try to stick with your own country. Speaking of which, lag backstabs still exist even with no lag, which leads me to believe a lot of it must be in the way it was programmed. It is what it is. This time around, you can set a network password, which finally makes it possible to connect with friends. Now you can play through the whole game with friends without having to worry about maintaining your level and hiding your summon sign in places you'd think people wouldn't look. You can also play online with up to 3 other players cooperatively using the dried finger, which is incredible. This leaves room for 2 invaders. I spent a good amount of time running around as a gang squad with Ursa Rosa, Cthulhu, and Vine Big Boss. We all stripped off our shirts and helmets and handed a beating to any invaders that came our way. It was great. Then it got to a point where we waited 10 minutes just for another invasion and decided to go our own ways. We had some good times, didn't we? If multiplayer is what you're after, Dark Souls Remastered can give you that rich multiplayer experience the developers originally intended for you to have, with its robust online community. Some other notable changes are in the customization options, such as being able to scale your HUD down. I ended up settling with 75% of the original scale. I just wish there was a way to control the opacity of these menus in order to see things behind them. Most of the other options are the same, but I should warn you, just in case you're not already familiar with this, turn off auto wall recovery. Just about anything will move the camera and send you falling to your death, especially when you're on rafters, walking along narrow beams. You can also remap your controls entirely. It's a nice feature, but I can't imagine ever needing use for it because I'm fine with the default controls. Now, while in the menus, you can select the quantity of the items you wish to use. This will save time, and no longer will there be the tedious process of consuming each and every soul one by one. At the same time, it still asks how many you want to consume, even if you only have one of the item, which is a bit silly. They could have coded it not to ask you when it's obvious you only have one of the item. The very same goes for items you wish to drop. An issue I experienced, which will likely carry over into the main game because it was some kind of issue in Dark Souls 2, was that the summon signs do not refresh fast enough. If another player in another world got to a summon sign before you, it could result in a summon failed error message. Basically, if you wanted to summon someone, you'd have to wait for the old signs to disappear and new ones to appear, and hope for the best. This will likely not be changed before release. I feel like a re-release of this masterpiece is great and all, but an enhanced port simply doesn't do it justice. The recently released Shadow of the Colossus is a shining example of how to remake a game, making it more beautiful than ever, while also not changing a single thing about the core experience. Dark Souls could have benefited from certain enhancements in the gameplay, such as with multi-directional rolling. Still, you only got the 4 directions you can roll in. Some may appreciate this is unchanged, but it's just too primitive and not up to snuff with the recent Dark Souls entries. It's apparent to me this is a remaster done not out of necessity, but for a few extra bucks. What it truly needed was a remaster, but what it got was a port, an experience that parallels that of the already existing PC release with DS Fix. It's all very similar to the PS4 port of Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, in that not much has changed other than the higher resolution and framerate. Only, From Software realized with that game the problem with expectations in a Dark Souls title and completely remixed it, giving returning players a whole new experience. The whole allure of the series is not knowing what will come next. Anything can happen, and that unexpected nature is the reason you can see other players' phantoms or read their warning messages. Going in with a solid expectation of each area, enemy, or trap you'll encounter diminishes the sense of wonder and unease. And this was kind of my problem with Dark Souls 3, is that a lot of the traps were far too predictable. Dark Souls Remastered could have benefited from this treatment. If you're a new player, and you can manage to get over the hump of the difficulty learning curve, and you can manage to look past its age, you'll love this game. If you're a returning player, Dark Souls just won't be as difficult as it used to be, and you'll realize that now, especially with the fact that you can summon 3 other people to assist in your game, which wasn't possible before. Of course, this is just my first impression, based on a very short section of the game, starting with the bonfire at the end of the bridge and ending with the rooftop gargoyle fight, which I have played through many times before this. Also, this wasn't even a demo, it was a network stress test, so anything could change. But based on what I've read and seen, the final game won't be much different than this, and not far off from the vanilla experience. Regardless, I can't help but look forward to the game's release this month, as I love Dark Souls, and this is just yet another reason to play through the game again. Thanks for watching this short assessment of the Dark Souls Remastered. Look forward to my full assessment of this remaster detailing any changes. I also want to thank all my viewers, and especially the patrons you see right here. A very special shout out to Kenny Roberts, who increased his pledge. Thank you, it really means a lot to me. Seeing all these wonderful people willing to help me out means a lot to me. And I would love it if you too decided to support me on Patreon. Also, I can't forget these following Grand Champions.
Legendary Champions, Haley Lamb and Rain. Heroic Champions, Tyler Hunter and GSXP. Elite Champions, Yorcher S. Yartarsson, Miami Ink Vampire, and Kenny Roberts.
I have a million projects going on right now, and I'm not sure which to get to next. I'm already in the process of editing a no BS guide of Bloodborne, as you saw with the first episode. While I'm continuing that, I'm also editing a review of God of War. I also started a new Bloodborne lore, and there's just so much more I'm working on. So be patient, and you won't be disappointed.